Close your eyes and imagine standing before a being 3 times your height, a creature so massive that the ground shakes with each footstep, so powerful that it can uproot trees like weeds and crush boulders with its bare hands. A giant. Now open your eyes and ask yourself, why does every culture on Earth separated by oceans and millennia tell stories about such beings? The ancient Hebrews spoke of the Nephilim. The Greeks fought the Titans. The Norse feared the Jotnar. Native Americans remembered the Site-Ka. The Hindus recorded battles with the Daityas. African tribes passed down tales of colossal ancestors. Chinese mythology begins with Pangu, a giant who separated heaven from earth. These are not isolated myths. They are a global phenomenon, and that raises an uncomfortable question: why? If giants never existed, why are the stories so widespread, so consistent, so detailed? And if they did exist, where is the evidence? What happened to them? And most importantly, who decided we should stop looking? Tonight, we investigate the complete history of giants, not to prove they existed and not to dismiss the possibility, but to understand what these legends mean, where they came from, what evidence has been found, what evidence has been suppressed, and why this question matters more than you might think. We will examine the biblical Nephilim and their connection to fallen angels, the Greek Titans who waged war against the gods, the Norse Jotnar who will destroy the world at Ragnarok. We will explore the archaeological anomalies that believers cite as proof, the Smithsonian controversy and whether giant skeletons were really destroyed, the photographic evidence and why it is all fraudulent, the medical science of gigantism and why extreme height is lethal, and the psychological reasons why every culture independently created giant myths. Some of what we find will support the believers. Much of it will not. But all of it will reveal something profound about human nature, human history, and the stories we tell ourselves about our place in the cosmos. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and this is the complete history of giants, from the Nephilim to the Norse, from ancient texts to modern hoaxes, from religious scripture to scientific explanation. 2.5 hours. Every culture, every theory, every piece of evidence. The question is not whether you believe in giants. The question is why the entire world once did, and what we lost when we stopped. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Nephilim. We start where Western civilization's giant tradition begins, Genesis chapter 6. The text is brief, cryptic, and has haunted theologians for millennia. It appears just before the story of Noah's flood, in a passage that seems designed to explain why God decided to destroy the world. Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. 4 verses. 4 verses that have spawned thousands of pages of commentary, dozens of theological interpretations, and entire apocalyptic traditions. The core mystery is this: who, or what, were the Nephilim? And who were the sons of God who fathered them? The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root naphal, meaning to fall. So Nephilim could mean fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. Traditional Jewish interpretation identifies the sons of God as the descendants of Seth, Adam's third son, the righteous line. The daughters of man would then be the descendants of Cain, the cursed line. The Nephilim, in this reading, are not supernatural beings, but the offspring of intermarriage between these two human lineages, resulting in moral corruption. But there is another interpretation, one found in the earliest Jewish texts and adopted by many early Christians. The sons of God are angels, specifically fallen angels who rebelled against God, descended to earth, and took human women as wives. The Nephilim are their offspring, half angel, half human hybrids, giants, monsters, abominations that corrupted the entire human race and necessitated the flood. This interpretation is not fringe speculation. It is found in the Book of Enoch, one of the most important texts in Second Temple Judaism. First Enoch, written around the 3rd century BCE, expands dramatically on the Genesis account. It names the leaders of the fallen angels, Semjaza, Azazel, Armoros, and others. It describes how 200 angels, called the Watchers, descended to Mount Hermon and swore an oath to take human wives despite knowing it was forbidden. According to Enoch, the Watchers taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught men to make swords and weapons. Other angels taught sorcery, astrology, the cutting of roots, and the use of cosmetics. These were not gifts, they were corruptions. Knowledge that humanity was not ready for. Technology without wisdom. Power without restraint. And the Watchers' children, the Nephilim, were giants. Enoch describes them as 300 cubits tall. If we take a cubit as approximately 18 inches, that would make them 450 feet tall. Clearly symbolic exaggeration, but the point is made. These were beings of enormous size and power, and they were evil. The Nephilim, according to Enoch, devoured all the food that humans produced. When that ran out, they began eating humans. Then they began eating each other. They were violent, insatiable, and utterly corrupting to the human race. Their presence on earth was an abomination that could not be tolerated. So God sent the flood, not primarily to punish human sin, but to eliminate the Nephilim and their angelic fathers. The Watchers were imprisoned in a place called Dudail, bound until the final judgment. Their giant offspring were killed in the flood, and humanity got a fresh start with Noah, the one remaining uncorrupted human bloodline. This is not a minor interpretive tradition. The Book of Enoch was widely read and respected in Second Temple Judaism. It is quoted in the New Testament in the Epistle of Jude. Early church fathers, including Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, and Tertullian, all accepted the fallen angel interpretation of Genesis 6. It was mainstream Christian teaching for centuries. So what happened? Why did the interpretation change? In the 5th century, Augustine of Hippo argued against the fallen angel interpretation. He found it theologically problematic. Angels are spiritual beings. How could they have physical relations with humans? How could they produce offspring? Augustine preferred the Sethite interpretation. The sons of God were Seth's descendants. The daughters of man were Cain's descendants. And the Nephilim were simply wicked humans, perhaps unusually tall, but not supernatural. Augustine's interpretation became dominant in Western Christianity. The Book of Enoch was gradually marginalized, eventually removed from the biblical canon, except in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Nephilim were spiritualized, made metaphorical, stripped of their monstrous nature. By the medieval period, most Christians read Genesis 6 as a warning against intermarriage between the godly and the ungodly, nothing more. But the older interpretation never completely disappeared. It survived in Jewish mysticism, in the Kabbalah, in apocalyptic literature, and in recent decades, it has experienced a massive revival. Modern evangelical writers have rediscovered Enoch. They have reintroduced the fallen angel interpretation, and they have connected the Nephilim to everything from ancient megalithic structures, to UFO phenomena, to transhumanism. Whether you accept the supernatural interpretation or not, one thing is undeniable. The ancient world took the Nephilim seriously. They were not seen as metaphor or myth. They were understood as historical reality. Something happened in the ancient past that required explanation. Some catastrophe, some corruption, some presence of beings that should not have existed. And the Nephilim tradition is the explanation that was passed down. Genesis 6 also tells us that the Nephilim existed and also afterward, after the flood. This creates a massive theological problem. If the flood's purpose was to eliminate the Nephilim, why did they return? Various explanations have been proposed. Perhaps one of Noah's sons married a woman with Nephilim blood. Perhaps the fallen angels repeated their transgression after the flood. Perhaps not all Nephilim were destroyed. Or perhaps Nephilim became a general term for any exceptionally tall or powerful people, not necessarily supernatural. What we know is that the Hebrew Bible continues to reference giants after the flood, and these post-flood giants have names, locations, and in some cases, archaeological footprints. They are the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Zamzumim. And according to the biblical narrative, the Israelites encountered them when they entered the Promised Land. These encounters were terrifying, militarily significant, and theologically charged, and they form the next chapter of our investigation. The Nephilim are not simply mythological curiosities, they are the foundation of a global giant tradition. Whether they were real beings, symbolic representations of corruption, or cultural memories of something else entirely, they matter. Because every giant story that follows, in every culture, echoes the same themes. Beings of enormous power, moral corruption, divine punishment, and the thin line between the human and the monstrous. The Nephilim were the first, but they were not the last. Chapter 2: The Anakim and the Conquest of Canaan. When the Israelites, freed from slavery in Egypt, approached the Promised Land, Moses sent 12 spies to scout Canaan. Their report, recorded in Numbers chapter 13, is one of the most dramatic moments in the biblical narrative. And it centers on giants. 10 of the 12 spies returned terrified. Numbers 13, verses 32 and 33. The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Read that again. The spies saw Nephilim, post-flood Nephilim. Specifically, they saw the Anakim, and identified them as descended from the pre-flood Nephilim. Whether this is literally true or the spies were using Nephilim as a general term for giants, the text is clear. There were beings in Canaan so large that trained warriors felt like insects in their presence. The people of Israel, already exhausted and frightened, refused to enter Canaan. God punished this lack of faith by condemning that generation to wander the desert for 40 years. Only their children would enter the Promised Land. And those children would have to face the giants that their parents had feared. So who were the Anakim? According to Deuteronomy, they were a people great and tall, descended from a figure named Anak. Joshua chapter 11 describes them as living in the hill country of Judah, Hebron, Debir, and Anab. They were associated with other giant clans, including the Rephaim and the Emim, and they were formidable warriors. The conquest narratives in Joshua describe systematic campaigns to eliminate the Anakim. Joshua 11, verse 21. And Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. The language is stark. This was not simply military conquest. It was extermination. The Hebrews were commanded to completely destroy the Anakim, to leave none alive. and the text frames this as righteous judgment. The giants were not innocent bystanders. They were remnants of the pre-flood corruption, beings whose existence was itself an abomination. But the extermination was incomplete. Joshua 11, verse 22. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. The giants survived in the Philistine cities, and this survival would have consequences because Gath would later be home to the most famous giant in history, Goliath. Before we get to Goliath, we need to address the broader question: is there any historical or archaeological evidence for the Anakim? Did a population of unusually tall people actually live in Bronze Age Canaan? The answer is complicated. We have no skeletal remains that definitively prove the existence of 9-foot giants. However, we do have evidence of social stratification and warrior elites in Bronze Age Canaan. Wealthy rulers, well-fed and well-trained, would have been significantly taller than the average malnourished peasant. A 6'6" warrior would seem like a giant to a 5'2" farmer. We also have Egyptian records that describe Canaanite populations. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence from the 14th century BCE, reference various Canaanite city-states and peoples. While they do not specifically mention giants, they do describe a stratified society with powerful local rulers. And then there are the megaliths. Throughout the Levant, there are massive stone structures, dolmens, stone circles, and fortifications built with blocks weighing many tons. Later peoples, seeing these structures, and unable to imagine how humans could have moved such massive stones, attributed them to giants. Whether the builders were literally giants or simply possessed engineering knowledge that was later lost is debatable. But the structures themselves fueled giant legends for millennia. The biblical narrative also mentions the Rephaim, another giant race. Deuteronomy 3 verse 11 describes Og, king of Bashan, as the remnant of the Rephaim, and it provides specific measurements. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length and 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit. 9 cubits is approximately 13.5 feet. If this was Og's bed, and if we assume a bed is slightly longer than the person sleeping in it, Og would have been around 12 feet tall. Skeptics argue the bed was actually a sarcophagus, which would be larger than the body, or that the entire story is exaggeration or propaganda. Still, the text is oddly specific. It names a location where the bed could be seen. It invites verification. That is unusual for pure myth. Archaeological work in the region has uncovered large Iron Age structures in Bashan, the area Og supposedly ruled. These structures used massive basalt blocks. Again, whether this proves giants lived there or simply demonstrates ancient engineering capability is open to interpretation. What is not open to interpretation is that the conquest narratives treat the giants as both real and threatening. The Israelites were commanded to destroy them utterly, no treaties, no assimilation, complete extermination. And this raises an uncomfortable question: were the giants really so evil that genocide was justified? Or was the giant designation a way to dehumanize the enemy and make their destruction morally acceptable? Ancient conquest propaganda often depicted enemies as subhuman, monstrous, or superhuman. Making the Canaanites into literal giants would justify their complete destruction. We didn't commit genocide against fellow humans, we eliminated monsters. This is a disturbing pattern that recurs throughout history. Colonial powers justified atrocities against indigenous peoples by depicting them as savage, inhuman, giant, or demonic. So we face a dilemma. Either the Anakim were genuinely tall people, perhaps with genetic conditions causing gigantism, who became legendary over time, or they were normal humans, demonized and exaggerated to justify conquest. Or, if we take the text at face value, they were literal giant hybrids descended from the Nephilim, whose existence was an ontological threat that required elimination. Theology aside, what is certain is that the giant tradition deeply shaped Israelite identity. They were the people who, with God's help, defeated giants. This became a core narrative. Small, weak Israel, empowered by faith, triumphing over physically superior enemies. David and Goliath is the perfect encapsulation of this narrative. And that is where we turn next. Chapter 3. Goliath of Gath, 1 Samuel chapter 17. The Philistines and Israelites are at war. The armies face each other across the valley of Elah, and then a champion emerges from the Philistine camp. His name is Goliath, and he is a giant. The text describes him precisely. He was 6 cubits and a span in height. A cubit is approximately 18 inches. A span is about 9 inches. So Goliath was 6 cubits, 9 feet, plus a span, 9 inches, making him 9 feet 9 inches tall. His armor weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, approximately 125 pounds. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, thick as a small tree trunk. And the spearhead alone weighed 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. This is a warrior so massive, so heavily armed, that no Israelite dares face him. For 40 days, Goliath issues his challenge. Send a champion to fight him, one-on-one. If the Israelite wins, the Philistines will become servants. If Goliath wins, the Israelites will serve. King Saul, who is described elsewhere as head and shoulders taller than any Israelite, is terrified. His entire army is paralyzed. Then David arrives, a shepherd boy, bringing food to his brothers in the army. He hears Goliath's taunts and is outraged. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God? David volunteers to fight Goliath. Saul, desperate, agrees. He offers David his armor, but David refuses it. He has never worn armor, he cannot move in it. Instead, he takes his staff, 5 smooth stones from a stream, and his sling. Goliath, seeing this boy approaching, is insulted. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? But David is undaunted. You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. David runs toward Goliath, slings a stone, strikes him in the forehead. The giant falls. David takes Goliath's own sword and beheads him. The Philistines flee. Israel wins. This story is one of the most famous in Western civilization. It has been painted, sculpted, retold, and reinterpreted countless times. It is the archetypal underdog narrative. Small defeats large. Faith overcomes might. Skill and courage triumph over size and strength. But let us look more carefully at the details, because there are some very interesting anomalies in the text, and there are alternative readings that change the story significantly. First, Goliath's height. The Masoretic text, the Standard Hebrew Bible, says 6 cubits and a span, but the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation, says 4 cubits and a span. That would make Goliath 6 feet 9 inches tall. Still large, but not superhuman. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest Hebrew manuscripts, also say 4 cubits and a span. So which is correct? It is possible that the Masoretic text preserves an exaggeration that crept in over centuries of transmission. Making Goliath even taller increases the drama of David's victory. Or it is possible that the Septuagint translators, living in a Hellenistic world where giants were metaphorical, reduced Goliath's height to make the story more believable. If Goliath was 6'9", he was certainly large, but not impossibly so. Many modern humans reach that height. But if he was 9'9", he was in the realm of medical impossibility. Which brings us to the scientific question. Could a human actually be 9 feet tall and functional? Modern medicine tells us that extreme height, when caused by pituitary gigantism, comes with severe health problems. Robert Wadlow, the tallest confirmed human in history, reached 8 feet 11 inches. But he required leg braces to walk and died at age 22 from an infected blister, because his circulatory system could not adequately supply his extremities. Gigantism causes joint problems, heart strain, and shortened lifespan. A 9'9" warrior, carrying 125 pounds of armor and wielding heavy weapons, seems biologically implausible. However, Goliath's symptoms, as described in the text, are consistent with acromegaly, a condition caused by excess growth hormone in adulthood. Acromegaly produces enlarged hands, feet, and facial features, particularly the brow ridge and jaw. It can also cause vision problems. Some medical researchers have suggested that Goliath's challenge, "Come to me," and his failure to see David coming until the boy was very close, indicate that Goliath had tunnel vision, a common symptom of pituitary tumors causing acromegaly. If this is true, then David's victory becomes less miraculous and more tactical. He recognized that Goliath, despite his size and strength, had a significant weakness: poor vision. David stayed at range, used a projectile weapon, and struck before Goliath could close the distance. This does not diminish David's courage, but it does change the nature of the fight from miracle to skillful exploitation of enemy weakness. There is also the question of Goliath's origin. The text identifies him as from Gath, one of the 5 Philistine city-states. Earlier, we learned that some Anakim survived the Israelite conquest, specifically in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. So Goliath may have been descended from the Anakim. The text also mentions Goliath's brothers, other giants who fought for the Philistines. 2 Samuel 21 describes battles where David's warriors killed several giant Philistine champions, including one with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. This detail, the extra digits, is medically interesting. Polydactyly, having extra fingers or toes, is a genetic condition. It can run in families. If Goliath and his brothers all had this trait, it suggests they were from a specific family line, perhaps one with unusual genetics, producing both great height and polydactyly. This would support the idea that the post-flood giants were a distinct population, not just randomly tall individuals. But we must also consider the propaganda dimension. The story of David and Goliath serves Israelite political and religious purposes perfectly. David, the future king, is introduced as a man of faith, courage, and skill. Saul, by contrast, is shown as fearful and inadequate, foreshadowing his eventual replacement. The giant is a Philistine, one of Israel's primary enemies. Making him a giant makes the victory more impressive and the hero more heroic. This does not necessarily mean the story is fiction, but it does mean we should read it with awareness that ancient texts serve multiple purposes: history, theology, and political legitimacy. Regardless of the literal facts, the David and Goliath narrative has shaped Western consciousness for 3,000 years. Every underdog story is a retelling of David and Goliath. Every victory of skill over brute force, faith over fear, intelligence over strength, echoes this narrative. And the giant, the terrifying but ultimately vulnerable enemy, becomes the archetype for every overwhelming challenge that can nevertheless be overcome. Goliath was not the last biblical giant, but he was the most famous, and his defeat marked the beginning of the end for giants in Israelite territory. By the time of the monarchy, giants had been pushed to the margins or eliminated entirely. But the memory of them and the fear they inspired remained. And that memory would shape not just Israelite theology, but the mythology of every culture that encountered the Hebrew Bible. The Nephilim were mysterious. The Anakim were terrifying. But Goliath was personal. He had a name, a place of origin, specific weapons and measurements. He was real enough to touch. And that made him, paradoxically, both more human and more monstrous. Because if giants like Goliath could exist, then the boundary between the human and the superhuman was thinner than we like to believe. And that is a disturbing thought. We are not yet done with biblical giants, but we must now expand our view beyond Israel, beyond the Near East, to the civilizations that would inherit and transform these traditions. We turn now to Greece, where giants were not defeated warriors, but cosmic forces, where the battle between gods and giants shaped the very structure of reality, where titans and gigantes and cyclopes were not aberrations, but fundamental to creation itself. The Greeks knew giants, and they knew them well. Chapter 4: The Titans. Greek mythology begins in chaos. Before the gods, before humanity, before even the earth and sky as we know them, there was only chaos, the primordial void. From chaos emerged Gaia, the earth, and Uranos, the sky. And from their union came the Titans, the first generation of divine beings, and they were giants. According to Hesiod's Theogony, written in the 8th century BCE, Gaia and Uranos produced 12 Titans, 6 male and 6 female. Oceanus, Cuus, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus, and Kronos among the males. Theia, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys among the females. These were not merely large humans, they were cosmic forces, embodiments of fundamental aspects of reality. Oceanus was the world river, Hyperion was light. Mnemosyne was memory. They were both literal beings and abstract principles. The Titans ruled during a golden age, a time before conflict, before labor, before death as we know it. But this age was not peaceful by our standards. It was the age before order was imposed. Raw elemental power, uncontrolled and unstoppable. The Titans were not benevolent. They were natural forces, indifferent to human concerns, because humans did not yet exist. The pivotal event in Titan mythology is the castration of Uranos. Uranos, the sky, continuously copulated with Gaia, the earth, keeping their children trapped inside her womb. Gaia, suffering, fashioned a sickle from adamant and gave it to her youngest son, Kronos. When Uranos came to Gaia again, Kronos reached out from his hiding place and castrated his father, casting the severed genitals into the sea. From the blood that fell on Gaia, the Furies and the Gigantes were born. From the genitals in the sea, foam formed, and from that foam emerged Aphrodite. With Uranos overthrown, Kronos became king of the Titans. But he had learned paranoia from his father. An oracle prophesied that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranos. So Kronos, whenever his wife Rhea gave birth, swallowed the child whole. He devoured Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. But Rhea, grieving and desperate, tricked him when her 6th child was born. She gave Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. He swallowed it without looking. The actual baby, Zeus, was hidden on Crete, raised in secret by nymphs and the goat Amalthea. When Zeus reached adulthood, he returned and forced Kronos to vomit up his siblings. Then Zeus led his brothers and sisters in war against the Titans. This was the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, one of the foundational myths of Greek cosmology. The Titanomachy lasted 10 years. Zeus and his siblings, called the Olympians, fought from Mount Olympus. The Titans fought from Mount Othrys. The battles shook the cosmos. Earth and sea boiled. Mountains crumbled. The universe itself was at risk of dissolution. Zeus and his allies had several advantages. First, they freed the Cyclopes from Tartarus, where Uranos had imprisoned them. The Cyclopes, grateful, forged weapons for the gods. Thunderbolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, a helmet of invisibility for Hades. Second, they freed the Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed giants, who hurled boulders at the Titans with devastating effect. Eventually, Zeus and the Olympians won. The Titans were defeated and cast into Tartarus, a prison deep beneath the underworld. The Hecatonchires were set as guards to ensure they never escaped. Only a few Titans were spared. Those who had sided with Zeus, including Oceanus and Prometheus, though Prometheus would later be punished for giving fire to humanity. With the Titans imprisoned, Zeus established a new cosmic order. The Olympian gods ruled from Mount Olympus. The universe was divided. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld, and humanity was created, though various myths disagree on how and why. The Titans represent something psychologically and theologically significant. They are the old order, the primordial chaos, the forces of nature before civilization imposed structure. Their overthrow is not simply a political coup. It is the victory of cosmos over chaos, order over entropy, civilization over wilderness. But the Titans are not simply defeated. They are imprisoned, suppressed, but not destroyed. Because you cannot destroy elemental forces. You can only constrain them. And there is always the danger that they might break free. In fact, Greek mythology preserves traditions that, at the end of time, during the final cosmic battle, the Titans will escape Tartarus and battle the gods once more. This mythology served multiple purposes for the Greeks. On one level, it explained the structure of the universe, why Zeus rules, where the gods came from, why there is conflict and struggle even among divine beings. On another level, it was political allegory. The Titans represented old ruling dynasties, overthrown by new powers, who established their legitimacy by demonizing their predecessors. And on a psychological level, the Titans represent primal forces within the human psyche, the raw drives, the untamed instincts, the chaos that civilization must constantly keep in check. It is worth noting the parallels to biblical mythology. In Genesis, the Nephilim appear before the flood, representing a corruption that must be eliminated. In Greek myth, the Titans rule before the Olympians, representing a chaotic age that must be overthrown. Both traditions feature giants or titanic beings as representatives of a primordial era, later defeated by the current cosmic order. Both traditions struggle with the question, where did the giants come from, and could they return? The Titans also raise the question of size. How large were they? Hesiod does not give specific measurements, but the implication is that they are cosmically large. Cronus swallows his children whole, and they live inside his stomach, fully grown. When Zeus forces him to vomit them up, they emerge as adults. This is clearly not literal. The Titans are not simply big people. They are mythological beings whose size represents their power and their cosmic scope. Later, Greek art depicts the Titans as human-sized, though more powerful and primal-looking than the Olympian gods. They are shown with long hair and beards, muscular and fierce, but they are recognizable as anthropomorphic. This may reflect a shift in Greek thought, from the archaic period when gods were more alien and cosmic, to the classical period when gods were imagined in more human terms. But the Titans were not the only giants in Greek mythology. They were merely the first. The earth goddess Gaia, angry that her children the Titans were imprisoned, would produce a new race of giants to challenge the Olympians. These were the Gigantes, and their war against the gods, the Gigantomachy, would be even more destructive than the Titanomachy. The giants never stopped coming, and the gods never stopped fighting them, because that is the nature of cosmos. Order must constantly battle chaos. Civilization must constantly beat back wilderness, and humanity, caught between gods and giants, must choose which side it is on. Chapter 5. The Gigantomachy. The Titans were imprisoned, Zeus and the Olympians ruled. But Gaia, the primordial earth herself, was not satisfied. Her children had been cast into Tartarus. Her grandchildren, the Olympians, had become tyrants in her view. And so she gave birth to a new race of beings, specifically designed to overthrow Zeus and restore the old order. These were the Gigantes, the giants. The Gigantes were born from the blood of Uranos, when Kronos castrated him. That blood fell upon Gaia, and from it sprang beings of tremendous size and power. Unlike the Titans, who were divine and cosmic, the Gigantes were more physical, more monstrous. Greek art depicts them with human torsos but serpentine legs, scales, and sometimes multiple arms. They were earthborn, chthonic, connected to the raw power of the ground itself. The war between the Olympian gods and the Gigantes is called the Gigantomachy. It was prophesied that the gods could not defeat the giants without the help of a mortal hero. That hero was Heracles, the greatest of Greek heroes, who fought alongside the gods using his legendary strength and his poisoned arrows dipped in the blood of the Hydra. The battle was apocalyptic. The giants hurled mountains at the gods. They tore islands from the sea and used them as weapons. The gods responded with lightning, earthquakes, and fire. The entire landscape of Greece was said to have been shaped by this battle. Islands were created when mountains were thrown into the sea. Volcanoes formed where gods hurled giants into the earth. Each god faced specific giants. Zeus fought Porphyrion, the king of the giants, striking him down with a thunderbolt after Porphyrion attempted to rape Hera. Athena fought Enceladus, trapping him under the island of Sicily, where his movements cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Mount Etna is said to be the breath of Enceladus. Poseidon broke off a piece of the island of Kos and hurled it at the giant polyboats, creating the smaller island of Niceros, with the giant trapped beneath. Heracles played the crucial role. The giants could be wounded by gods, but not killed. Only mortal weapons could deliver the final blow. So Heracles, with his arrows, finished off giant after giant as the gods wounded them. The battle raged across the known world, from Phlegra in Macedonia to Pallene to the volcanic fields of Campania in Italy. Eventually, the gods and Heracles triumphed. The giants were killed, buried under islands and mountains, or cast into Tartarus alongside the Titans. Order was restored, but the victory came at enormous cost. The earth itself was scarred by the battle, and the possibility remained that the giants might one day rise again. The Gigantomachy was enormously popular in Greek art and literature. The Pergamon altar, one of the masterpieces of Hellenistic sculpture, depicts the battle in extraordinary detail. Gods and giants struggle in dynamic, violent poses. The giants are shown as powerful but ultimately doomed, their serpentine legs writhing as they fall. The gods are triumphant but clearly exerting themselves, not casually victorious but desperately fighting for survival. Why did the Greeks tell this story? On one level, it is simply a good narrative. Gods versus monsters, order versus chaos, civilization versus the wild. But on a deeper level, the Gigantomachy represents the constant struggle to maintain civilization. The giants are not simply defeated once and forgotten. They are buried beneath the earth, still alive, still dangerous. Their movements cause earthquakes. Their breath creates volcanoes. They are always threatening to break free. This is a profound metaphor for the fragility of order. Civilization is not a permanent achievement. It is a constant effort. The forces of chaos are always present, always pressing against the boundaries we have established. Relax your vigilance, and the giants will rise. This is not ancient superstition. This is political and psychological wisdom encoded in myth. The Gigantomachy also served as political propaganda. When Alexander the Great depicted himself fighting in the style of the gods battling giants, he was claiming divine authority. When Rome adopted and adapted Greek mythology, the emperors portrayed themselves as heirs to Zeus, defenders of order against chaos. Depicting your enemies as giants was a way of justifying total war. They are not just political rivals. They are ontological threats to reality itself. But there is another dimension to the giants that is often overlooked. In some traditions, the giants are not simply evil. They are tragic. They are born from the blood of a wounded god, created by a grieving mother, and thrown into a war they did not choose. They fight for their right to exist, for their place in the cosmos. And they lose, inevitably, because the narrative is written by the victors. This reading complicates the simplistic, gods good, giants bad interpretation. Perhaps the giants represent indigenous populations, conquered by Greek colonizers, demonized in mythology to justify their subjugation. Perhaps they represent the old gods of pre-Greek peoples, overthrown and buried but never entirely forgotten. Perhaps they represent aspects of nature that civilization cannot fully control. Earthquakes, volcanoes, the deep earth itself. Whatever their origin, the gigantes became a permanent part of Western mythology. Every depiction of gods fighting monsters, every story of heroes battling overwhelming odds, every image of order triumphing over chaos carries echoes of the gigantomachy, and the giants themselves trapped beneath mountains and islands serve as a reminder. What is buried is not gone. What is suppressed can return, and the earth itself holds memories of battles we would prefer to forget. But the Greeks had yet more giants to offer. The Titans ruled the cosmos. The Gigantes challenged the gods. But there was a third category of giant beings in Greek mythology, the monstrous races, and chief among these were the Cyclopes. Chapter 6. Cyclopes and Monstrous Giants. The Cyclopes are among the most distinctive giants in Greek mythology. They are defined by a single characteristic, one eye in the center of their foreheads. But there are actually two distinct traditions about the Cyclopes, and they are surprisingly contradictory. In Hesiod's Theogony, the Cyclopes are children of Gaia and Uranus, making them siblings to the Titans. There are three of them, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, representing thunder, lightning, and brightness. These Cyclopes are master craftsmen, divine smiths who forge the weapons of the gods. They created Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helmet of invisibility. After the Titanomachy, they served Zeus faithfully, working in forges beneath volcanoes. These Cyclopes are not monsters. They are artisans, skilled and valuable. They are giants certainly, but not evil. In fact, they are instrumental in establishing and maintaining cosmic order. Without their weapons, the Olympians could not have defeated the Titans. They are civilization builders, not civilization destroyers. But then there is the second tradition, found in Homer's Odyssey. Here, the Cyclopes are savage, pastoral giants living on an island with no laws, no agriculture, no civilization. Each lives in his own cave, tends his own flocks, and recognizes no authority beyond his own strength. They are isolated, primitive, and dangerous. The most famous Cyclops in this tradition is Polyphemus, son of Poseidon. When Odysseus and his men land on the Cyclops island seeking hospitality, Polyphemus traps them in his cave and begins eating them, two at a time. Odysseus, ever cunning, gets Polyphemus drunk on wine, tells him his name is Nobody, and then blinds the giant with a heated steak while he sleeps. When Polyphemus screams for help, the other Cyclopes ask who is harming him. He shouts, "Nobody is harming me!" And they leave him alone. Odysseus and his men escape by clinging to the undersides of Polyphemus's sheep, as the blind giant lets them out to graze, feeling only their backs. Once safely aboard his ship, Odysseus, in a moment of fatal pride, reveals his true name and taunts the blinded Cyclops. Polyphemus prays to his father Poseidon for vengeance, cursing Odysseus to a long and painful journey home. Poseidon answers that prayer, and Odysseus wanders for 10 years before reaching Ithaca. The Odyssey's Cyclopes are fundamentally different from Hesiod's. They are not divine craftsmen, but savage shepherds. They represent the opposite of Greek civilization. No cities, no laws, no agriculture, no ships, no trade. They are giants not in the sense of cosmic forces, but in the sense of primitive brutes. And they are to be feared, tricked, and ultimately escaped from, not respected or allied with. So which tradition is correct? The answer is that both existed simultaneously in Greek culture, and the Greeks did not seem particularly bothered by the contradiction. Perhaps the Cyclopes, like the Titans, represent multiple things. The divine craftsmen represent the taming of natural forces: fire, metallurgy, technology. The savage shepherds represent untamed nature, the wild, the lawless, the dangerous. There is also a scientific explanation for the Cyclops myth that modern paleontologists have found compelling. Dwarf elephant skulls, which are found on several Mediterranean islands including Sicily, have a large central nasal cavity that, to someone unfamiliar with elephant anatomy, could easily be mistaken for a single eye socket. Ancient Greeks, finding these skulls and not recognizing them as elephant remains, might have concluded they belonged to one-eyed giants. The skull's size, combined with the prominent central hole, would create a convincing Cyclops skull. This is speculative, but plausible. It demonstrates how real physical evidence, misinterpreted, can give rise to or reinforce mythological traditions. The Greeks did not invent giants out of nothing. They found large bones, unusual skulls, and massive ancient structures, and they created narratives to explain them. Beyond the Cyclopes, Greek mythology includes numerous other giant or monstrous beings. The Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed giants who helped Zeus defeat the Titans. The Laestrygonians, cannibal giants encountered by Odysseus, who destroyed most of his fleet. Antaeus, a giant son of Gaia who drew strength from contact with the earth and could only be defeated when Heracles lifted him up and crushed him in midair. Talos, a bronze giant who guarded Crete, hurling boulders at approaching ships. Each of these giants serves a narrative function. They are obstacles for heroes to overcome. They demonstrate the hero's courage, intelligence, or divine favor. They mark the boundary between the civilized world and the wilderness. And they remind the audience that the world is vast, dangerous, and full of powers greater than humanity. But Greek giants are not simply enemies. Some, like Prometheus the Titan, are benefactors to humanity despite being punished by the gods. Some, like the divine Cyclopes, are essential to civilization. And some, like Antaeus, are sympathetic despite their opposition to the hero. They love their mother Gaia, they defend their homes, they have families and feelings. This complexity distinguishes Greek giant mythology from the biblical tradition. In the Hebrew Bible, giants are generally presented as unambiguous enemies, corruptions to be eliminated. In Greek mythology, giants are more nuanced. They are forces of nature, which can be beneficial or destructive depending on context. They are the old order, which had its own validity before being overthrown. They are the other, but an other that is sometimes noble, sometimes tragic, sometimes even admirable. As Greek culture spread through conquest and colonization, these giant myths spread with it. Rome absorbed and adapted Greek mythology, making the Titans and giants part of their own cultural heritage. And as Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, elements of Greek giant mythology blended with biblical traditions, creating new hybrid narratives. But before we explore that synthesis, we must travel north, to the frozen lands of Scandinavia, to the realms of the Norse, where giants were not defeated and imprisoned, but remained active, powerful, and destined to ultimately destroy the gods themselves. In Norse mythology, the giants do not lose, they win, and their victory is called Ragnarok. Chapter 7. The Jotnar. In the beginning, there was only Ginnungagap, the primordial void. To the north lay Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist. To the south lay Muspelheim, the realm of fire. Where the heat of Muspelheim met the ice of Niflheim, melting occurred, and from those drops of water came the first living being, Ymir, the primordial giant. Ymir was not created by gods. He was not born from divine parents. He simply emerged from the void, the first conscious being in the cosmos. He was a giant, a Jotun, and from him would come all other giants. As Ymir slept, he sweated, and from his sweat were born more giants, male and female, an entire race. His legs mated with each other and produced a six-headed son. The giants were self-generating, requiring no outside force to reproduce. From the same melting ice that produced Ymir came Audumla, a primordial cow. Ymir fed from her milk, but Audumla licked the salty ice blocks, and over 3 days she uncovered a man, Buri, the first of the gods. Buri had a son, Bor, who married Bestla, a giantess. And Bor and Bestla had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. The gods and giants were therefore related from the beginning. The gods had giant ancestry. This is crucial. In Norse mythology, the divide between gods and giants is not absolute. There is intermarriage, alliance, conflict, and ultimately a shared doom. But the relationship began with violence. Odin, Vili, and Ve killed Ymir. They slew the primordial giant, and from his body created the world. His flesh became the earth. His blood became the seas and rivers. His bones became the mountains. His teeth became rocks and stones. His hair became the trees. His skull became the sky, held up at 4 corners by 4 dwarves. His brains were thrown into the air and became the clouds, and his eyebrows formed the barrier, Midgard, the realm of humans, protecting them from the giants who lived in the outer realms. When Ymir was killed, his blood flooded the world and drowned all the giants except Bergelmir and his wife, who escaped in a boat and repopulated the giant race. This is parallel to the biblical flood, with Bergelmir as the giant Noah. The giants survived the cosmic catastrophe and remain a threat. The gods established their realm, Asgard, connected to Midgard by the rainbow bridge Bifrost. The giants lived in Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, a wild and harsh land beyond the borders of civilization. But the boundaries between the realms were permeable. Gods visited Jotunheim. Giants came to Asgard. There were marriages between the 2 races, though these were often troubled. The Norse word for giants, Jotnar, singular Jotun, does not necessarily mean physically large, though they often are depicted as such. It means something closer to devourers or chaotic forces. The Jotnar are associated with natural phenomena, frost, fire, storms, mountains. They are not civilized. They do not build cities or form governments. They live according to their own laws, which are the laws of nature, strength, cunning, survival. The frost giants, or Hrimthursar, dwell in the frozen wastes. They represent the deadly cold of the Scandinavian winter, the ice that can kill the unprepared. The fire giants dwell in Muspelheim, led by Surtur, who will ultimately burn the world at Ragnarok. They represent the destructive power of fire, the volcanoes of Iceland, the heat that consumes forests and homes. But the Jotnar are not simply villains. Many of them are wise. even prophetic. Mimir, a giant whose severed head advises Odin, possesses immense knowledge. Vafthrûdnir, a giant whom Odin visits in disguise, knows the secrets of the past and future. The giantess Angerboda bore Loki 3 children: Fenrir, the wolf, Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Hel, the ruler of the underworld. These beings are monstrous and dangerous, but they are also integral to the cosmic order. Thor, the thunder god, is the primary enemy of the giants. He travels to Jotunheim repeatedly, smashing giants with his hammer Mjolnir. These stories are told with humor and violence. Thor drinks nearly an entire ocean in a contest, lifts the disguised world serpent, thinking it is a cat, wrestles old age herself. The giants trick and challenge Thor, and he responds with brute force. Yet even Thor recognizes that the giants are formidable. They are not easily defeated. And then there is Loki. Loki is a complicated figure. He is counted among the gods. He lives in Asgard. He is Odin's blood brother. But he is actually a Jotun by birth. His father is the giant Farbauti. Loki is the trickster, the shapeshifter, the agent of chaos. He helps the gods as often as he harms them. He is the liminal figure, belonging fully to neither gods nor giants, moving between the two worlds. Loki's ultimate betrayal precipitates Ragnarok. After causing the death of Baldur, the most beloved of the gods, Loki is captured and bound beneath the earth. Poison drips onto his face from a serpent, and his wife Sigyn catches it in a bowl. But when she must empty the bowl, the poison strikes him, and his convulsions cause earthquakes. He will remain bound until Ragnarok, when he will break free and lead the giants against the gods. The Norse understood that the order established by Odin was temporary. The world was created from the body of a slain giant. It is built on violence, and violence will ultimately destroy it. The gods know this. They know that Ragnarok is coming. The Norns, the weavers of fate, have declared it. The Völva, the seeress, has prophesied it, and there is nothing the gods can do to prevent it. At Ragnarok, the giants will emerge from Jotunheim. Surtur and the fire giants will cross the Bifrost, which will break under their weight. Loki will lead an army of the dishonored dead from Hel. Fenrir will break his chains and swallow the sun. Jormungandr will rise from the ocean and poison the sky, and the gods will march out to face them in the final battle. Odin will face Fenrir and be devoured. Thor will kill Jormungandr, but will die from its poison. Freyr will fall to Surtur. Loki and Heimdall will slay each other, and when the battle is over, Surtur will set the world aflame, burning everything to ash. The earth will sink into the sea. The stars will fall from the sky, and the age of gods and men will end. But the prophecy does not end there. The earth will rise again from the water, green and fertile. A few gods will survive. Baldur will return from Hel. Vidar and Vali will live through the flames. Modi and Magni will inherit Thor's hammer. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, will survive by hiding in Yggdrasil, the world tree. And from them, a new human race will emerge. The cycle will begin again. Perhaps the new world will be better. Perhaps it will be the same. The mythology does not say, but what is clear is that the Norse did not believe in permanent victory. Chaos cannot be eliminated. The giants cannot be destroyed. They can only be fought over and over until the inevitable end. This is a remarkably pessimistic worldview by modern standards. But it is also remarkably honest. The Norse lived in a harsh environment. They knew that winter always returns. They knew that even the mightiest warrior eventually falls. They knew that civilizations collapse, and so their mythology reflected that knowledge. The gods are not all-powerful. They are doomed, but they fight anyway, because that is what heroes do. The giants in Norse mythology are not defeated and forgotten. They are ever present, ever-threatening and ultimately victorious. They are the forces of nature that civilization can hold at bay for a time, but never truly conquer. They are entropy, chaos, the inevitable return to the primordial void. And in the end, they will unmake what the gods made from the body of their ancestor. This makes Norse giant mythology fundamentally different from Greek or biblical traditions. The Hebrew Nephilim were destroyed in the flood. The Greek Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus. But the Norse Jotnar cannot be eliminated. They are woven into the fabric of existence itself. The world was made from a giant. The gods have giant blood. And giants will end everything. Perhaps this is the most terrifying giant tradition of all. Not because the giants are particularly monstrous, but because they are inevitable. Chapter 8. Famous Norse Giants. While the Jotnar as a category are defined by their opposition to cosmic order, individual giants in Norse mythology are far more complex. Some are enemies, some are allies, some are lovers and spouses of the gods, and some are gods themselves, depending on how you define divinity. Let us examine a few of the most significant giants in Norse mythology, because their stories reveal the nuanced relationship between the Aesir and the Jotnar. Skadi is perhaps the clearest example of a giant integrated into the pantheon of gods. She is the daughter of the giant Thiazi, who was killed by the gods after he kidnapped the goddess Idun. Skadi, seeking vengeance, travels to Asgard fully armed. The gods, not wanting another war, offer her compensation. She may choose a husband from among the gods, but she must choose by looking only at their feet. Skadi hopes to choose Baldur, the most beautiful god, but she chooses Njord instead. Mistaking his clean feet, he is a sea god. For Baldur's, the marriage is troubled because Njord loves the sea and Skadi loves the mountains. They attempt to compromise, spending 9 nights in each realm, but neither can tolerate the other's home. Eventually they separate, though amicably. Despite the failed marriage, Skadi is counted among the Aesir. She is the goddess of skiing, hunting, and winter. She lives in the mountains and is associated with wolves. Her integration shows that the boundary between giant and god is not absolute. A giant can become a god through marriage and acceptance by the divine community. Skadi is both giant and goddess, belonging to both categories simultaneously. Then there is Gerd, a beautiful giantess desired by Freyr, the god of fertility and kingship. Freyr sees her from Odin's throne, Hlidskjalf, and falls desperately in love. He sends his servant Skirnir to woo her, offering her magical gifts. When she refuses, Skirnir resorts to threats, including a curse that will make her hideous and isolated. Gerd finally agrees to meet Freyr, and they marry. This story is uncomfortable by modern standards. Gerd is essentially coerced through magical threats. But in the context of Norse mythology, it represents the union of civilization. Freyr, the god of farming and kingship, with the wild, Gerd, the untamed giantess of the mountains. Their marriage is necessary for cosmic balance. The gods need the giants. Order needs chaos. Civilization needs the wild, even if that relationship is fraught and forced. Loki, as mentioned earlier, is the most complex giant figure. He is a Jotun by birth, but adopted into the Aesir through a blood oath with Odin. He is the trickster, the shapeshifter, the agent of both order and chaos. Loki helps the gods repeatedly. He recovers Thor's stolen hammer. He helps rebuild Asgard's wall without paying the giant contractor. He cuts off Sif's hair and then replaces it with golden hair made by dwarves. But he also betrays them. He causes the death of Baldur. He insults the gods at a feast. And ultimately, he will lead the giants against Asgard at Ragnarok. Loki is the embodiment of the unstable relationship between gods and giants. He is proof that giants can be allies, but he is also proof that they cannot truly be trusted. Or perhaps more accurately, that the trickster energy he represents, creativity, chaos, boundary violation, is necessary for the world to function, but is also inherently dangerous. Without Loki, the gods would have no magical treasures, but with Loki, they are doomed. Utgard Loki is a giant encountered by Thor in one of the most famous Norse myths. Thor, Loki, and Thor's servants travel to the castle of Utgard, where they are challenged to contests by the giant king Utgard Loki. Thor fails every contest. He cannot drain a drinking horn because it is connected to the ocean. He cannot lift a cat because it is actually Jormungandr, the world's serpent in disguise. He cannot defeat an old woman in wrestling because she is old age personified. Only when Thor and his companions leave does Utgard Loki reveal that everything was illusion and magic. Thor actually performed miracles. He lowered the ocean. He lifted the world's serpent so high that its head touched the sky. He survived longer against old age than anyone thought possible. But the giant used magic to make Thor's strength seem like weakness. This story serves multiple functions. It shows that giants are not simply strong, they are clever and deceptive. It shows that Thor's strength, while immense, has limits. And it shows that the Jotnar possess knowledge and power that even the gods do not fully understand. The giants are dangerous, not because they are stupid brutes, but because they are sophisticated adversaries. Hrungnir is a giant who challenged Thor to a duel. He was said to have a stone head and a stone heart, and he wielded a giant whetstone as a weapon. In their battle, Thor threw Mjolnir, his hammer, and Hrungnir threw his whetstone. The weapons met in mid-air. Mjolnir shattered the whetstone but continued on to smash Hrungnir's skull. However, a fragment of the whetstone lodged in Thor's forehead, where it remained as a permanent wound. Thor won, but not without cost. This is significant. The gods can defeat giants, but they cannot do so without suffering. Every victory over chaos costs something. Thor bears the mark of his battle with Hrungnir for the rest of his life. And eventually, his battle with Jormungandr will cost him his life. The giants cannot be defeated without sacrifice. These individual giant stories complicate the simple gods versus giants narrative. The relationship is one of conflict, certainly, but also of kinship, marriage, alliance, and mutual dependence. The gods need the giants. Thor needs enemies to fight to prove his worthiness. Freyr needs Gerd to fulfill his role as a fertility god. Odin needs the wisdom of giant seers like Mimir and Vafthrudnir. The cosmos cannot function with only one principle. Order requires chaos to define itself against. Civilization requires wilderness to expand into. The gods require the giants, and yet the relationship is ultimately tragic. Because at Ragnarok, all these alliances will dissolve. The giants will march against the gods. The marriages will mean nothing. The blood oaths will break, and the world will burn. The Norse understood that even the most intimate relationships, even family bonds, cannot overcome the fundamental forces driving the cosmos toward destruction. This is perhaps the most profound message of Norse giant mythology, that doom is inevitable, that all things end, that even gods cannot escape fate. The giants are not simply enemies, they are fate itself, and fate is inexorable. Chapter 9. Native American Giants. The giant tradition is not limited to the Mediterranean and Europe. Every continent, every culture, has stories of beings larger and more powerful than ordinary humans. And these stories, arising independently in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, suggest something profound about the human psyche or human experience. We turn now to the Americas, where indigenous peoples preserved giant legends long before European contact. The Paiute people of Nevada tell the story of the Siteka, red-haired giants who once lived in the region. According to Paiute oral tradition, the Siteka were cannibalistic giants who preyed on the Paiute. They were fierce warriors, tall and red-haired, and they lived in caves. Eventually, the Paiute tribes united and waged war against the giants. The Sitakar retreated into Lovelock Cave. The Paiute sealed the entrance and set fire to the interior, smoking out the giants. Those who emerged were killed. Those who remained inside suffocated or burned. This story was preserved orally for generations. In the early 20th century, when archaeologists excavated Lovelock Cave, they found evidence of human habitation going back thousands of years. They also found mummified remains, some of which were reported to be unusually tall. Some accounts claim skeletons over 7 feet tall were found. Additionally, red-haired mummies were discovered in the cave, though this could be explained by the bleaching effect of the cave environment on dark hair rather than indicating a genuinely red-haired population. Were the Sitakar real? It is possible that a population of taller than average people lived in the region and came into conflict with the Paiute. It is also possible that the story is mythologized history, with the giants being normal-sized enemies made larger in oral tradition. Or it is possible that the entire story is pure legend, created to explain the presence of ancient remains in the cave. What is certain is that the Paiute took the story seriously. It was not presented as myth, but as history. The Sitakar were said to be an actual people, not supernatural beings, and the Paiute's description of them, including their red hair, predated the archaeological discoveries, suggesting that the oral tradition preserved some genuine information about the cave's previous inhabitants. The Cherokee people of the southeastern United States have traditions about giants called the Nunahi and the Starnake people. The Nunahi are described as spirit people, sometimes giant in stature, who lived in the mountains and helped the Cherokee in times of need. The Starnake was said to be a race of giants who lived in fortified stone towns in the Tennessee River Valley before the Cherokee arrived. According to legend, the Cherokee eventually drove them out or absorbed them. Interestingly, the Tennessee River Valley does contain numerous mounds and earthworks built by the Mississippian culture and earlier mound-building societies. These structures are impressive feats of engineering, some containing millions of cubic feet of earth. Later peoples, including European colonizers, looked at these mounds and could not believe that the contemporary indigenous peoples had built them. They speculated that a lost race of mound builders had created them, perhaps giants, before being displaced or destroyed. This mound builder myth was used to justify the displacement of Native Americans. If the mounds were built by a vanished race, then the current indigenous inhabitants were not the rightful owners of the land. They too were invaders who had displaced the true native people. This narrative was politically convenient for colonizers, but was completely false. Archaeological evidence conclusively demonstrates that the ancestors of the indigenous peoples encountered by Europeans built the mounds. However, the Cherokee traditions about the Starnake may preserve genuine cultural memory of pre-Cherokee peoples in the region. The Cherokee themselves migrated into the area relatively late. Encounters with remnant populations of earlier cultures, perhaps with different physical characteristics or architectural traditions, could have given rise to giant legends. The Aztecs of Mexico recorded traditions about the Quinametzin, a race of giants who lived in the previous world age. According to Aztec cosmology, the world has been created and destroyed 4 times. Each age had its own inhabitants. The Quinametzin lived in the 4th age, the age of water, which ended in a great flood. The few survivors of the Quinametzin were transformed into fish. The Aztecs pointed to massive architectural remains as evidence of the giants. The city of Teotihuacan, with its enormous pyramids, was already ancient and abandoned when the Aztecs found it. They attributed its construction to the Quinametzin, unable to imagine how ordinary humans could have moved such massive stones. Similarly, the megalithic heads carved by the Olmec civilization, some weighing over 20 tons, were seen as portraits of giants. In South America, the Inca had similar traditions. They called their giant predecessors the Huari, claiming they built the great stone structures that the Inca themselves later inhabited and expanded. The perfectly fitted megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo were attributed to giants or to divine intervention, because the Inca themselves, despite being master stonemasons, could not fully replicate the precision of these earlier works. The Mapuche people of Chile told Spanish chroniclers about giants called the Futa Chilwe, who lived in the forests and could uproot trees with their hands. The Guarani of the Amazon basin had traditions about the Curupira, forest giants with backward-facing feet who protected the jungle from intruders. What do these diverse traditions tell us? First, that the giant motif is universal. From Nevada to Tennessee to Mexico to Chile, indigenous peoples independently developed stories about beings larger and more powerful than themselves. Second, that these stories often explain impressive ruins or landscape features. The giants become the builders of structures that seem too grand for human construction. Third, that giants often represent previous inhabitants of the land, displaced or destroyed by the current population. This last point is crucial. Giant legends often encode genuine historical memory of population displacement. When one group conquers or replaces another, the memory of the previous inhabitants can become mythologized. They become larger, more powerful, more dangerous in the retelling. This serves psychological functions. It makes the victory more impressive, it justifies the conquest, and it explains why the previous culture is no longer present. But we must be careful not to dismiss all indigenous giant traditions as mere myth. Some may contain genuine information about tall populations. Some may preserve accurate knowledge about ancient structures and their builders. And some may point to encounters with unfamiliar animals or fossil remains that were interpreted as giant bones. The indigenous peoples of the Americas had sophisticated oral traditions capable of preserving information across millennia. When they told conquistadors and colonizers about giants, they were not simply telling fairy tales. They were sharing their history, their understanding of the land and its previous inhabitants, and their explanations for the mysteries they encountered. And crucially, these traditions were not influenced by biblical or European giant myths. They arose independently in cultures with no contact with the Mediterranean world. The fact that they echo the same themes, giants as builders, giants as previous inhabitants, giants defeated and displaced, suggests that these themes emerge from common human experiences and needs, not from cultural transmission. The giants of the Americas remind us that the giant tradition is global. It is not simply a quirk of Mediterranean mythology, it is a human universal. And that universality demands explanation. Chapter 10. Celtic, Asian, and African giants. The giant tradition extends far beyond the cultures we have examined so far. From the myths of Celtic Ireland, to the mountains of Japan, to the deserts of Africa, stories of enormous beings persist. These traditions are diverse, culturally specific, and yet strangely resonant with the giants we have already encountered. Let us briefly survey some of these global giant myths to appreciate the full scope of the phenomenon. In Irish mythology, the Fomorians are primordial giants who inhabited Ireland before the arrival of the gods. They are described as chaotic, often monstrous, associated with the sea and with darkness. The Fomorians warred repeatedly with the Tuatha De Danann, the divine race that eventually conquered Ireland. This conflict mirrors the Greek gigantomachy and the Norse Esir Jotnar conflict. Gods versus giants, order versus chaos, civilization versus wilderness. The most famous Fomorian is Baelor of the Evil Eye, whose gaze could kill. He was slain by his grandson Lugh during the Second Battle of Mag Tuared. The Fomorians were defeated but never entirely eliminated. They retreated beneath the sea or to the edges of the world, where they still dwell according to legend. Irish folklore also includes the Fíorbolg, men of the bag, who may have been giants or simply an earlier population of Ireland, mythologized and enlarged in the retelling. And then there are the numerous tales of individual giants associated with geographical features. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, a natural formation of basalt columns, was said to have been built by the giant Finn MacCool as a pathway to Scotland so he could fight the Scottish giant Benandona. These explanatory myths, attributing natural features to giants, appear across cultures. In England, legends speak of Gogmagog, a giant who was the last of a race of giants that once ruled Britain. He was defeated by the hero Coroneus and thrown from a cliff in Cornwall. In Wales, the giant Bendigeidfran, Bran the Blessed, was so large that no house could hold him and no ship could carry him. When he needed to cross the Irish Sea, he waded through it, and when his army needed to cross a river, he lay down and they walked across his back, using him as a bridge. Moving east to Asia, Japanese mythology features the Daidarabochi, colossal giants responsible for shaping the landscape. Mount Fuji was said to be created when a Daidarabochi scooped up Earth, leaving a depression that filled with water to become Lake Biwa. The islands of Japan themselves were said to have been formed by giants tearing pieces from the mainland. These are etiological myths, stories that explain how things came to be. The presence of mountains, lakes, islands, and other geographical features demands explanation. In the absence of geological knowledge, giants provided a satisfying answer. Something large created large things. This is intuitive mythological reasoning. Chinese mythology begins with Pangu, a primordial giant who separated heaven and earth. According to the myth, the universe began as a cosmic egg. Pangu emerged from the egg and pushed the sky upward and the earth downward, growing taller each day to keep them separated. After 18,000 years, when the separation was complete, Pangu died. His body transformed into the features of the world. His breath became the wind, his voice became thunder, his eyes became the sun and moon, his limbs became the four directions, his flesh became the soil, his blood became the rivers. This cosmogonic giant, a being whose body becomes the world, appears in multiple mythologies. We have already seen it in Norse myth with Ymir. Similar myths exist in Vedic Hindu traditions, where the cosmic giant Purusha is sacrificed and dismembered, and from his body, parts the castes of society and the elements of the cosmos are created. The Rig Veda describes this in the Purusha Sukta hymn. Hindu mythology is rich with giants. The Daityas and Danavas are races of giants descended from the sage Kashyapa and his wives Diti and Danu. They are rivals to the gods, the Devas, and wage constant war against them. The Asuras, often translated as demons, but more accurately understood as anti-gods or chaotic divine beings, are frequently depicted as giants. Ravana, the 10-headed demon king in the Ramayana, is a giant Asura who abducts Sita and is ultimately slain by Rama. The Rakshasa are another category of Hindu mythological beings, often giant in size, associated with the wilderness, darkness, and cannibalism. They can be malevolent or benevolent depending on the story, but they are always powerful and dangerous. In Islamic tradition, the people of Ad were a race of giants mentioned in the Quran. They were given great size and strength by Allah, but became arrogant and wicked. When they refused to heed the warnings of the Prophet Hud, they were destroyed by a catastrophic windstorm. The ruins of their city, Iram of the Pillars, are said to be buried in the empty quarter of Arabia, as we discussed in the Forbidden Places documentary. Og, a giant mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, also appears in Islamic tradition. He is said to have been so large that Noah's flood only reached his ankles. In some versions, he survived by riding on the roof of Noah's Ark. He lived for thousands of years before finally being slain by Moses during the conquest of Canaan. African mythologies, which are incredibly diverse given the continent's vast size and cultural variety, include numerous giant traditions. In some West African cultures, giants are said to have been the original inhabitants of the land before humans arrived. They were master builders, creating stone structures and shaping the landscape. They were eventually driven out or reduced in size as humans multiplied and the world became too crowded for beings of such scale. In some Central African traditions, giants are associated with the forest and with elephants. There are stories of enormous beings who command the elephants and can transform into them. Whether these represent actual encounters with unusually large humans, with elephants themselves, or with fossils of extinct megafauna misinterpreted as humanoid, is unclear. What becomes clear when we survey giants globally is that the tradition transcends individual cultures. Giants are not simply borrowed from one civilization by another. They arise independently, shaped by local needs and conditions, but expressing universal themes. Giants explain the impressive ruins of previous civilizations. They account for unusually large bones found in the earth. They represent the other, the previous inhabitants, the forces that preceded and opposed the current order. They embody nature's power and humanity's smallness in the face of that power. And crucially, almost every giant tradition includes the same basic narrative. The giants came first. They were powerful, but flawed. They were defeated or diminished by the gods or heroes of the current order. And they now exist at the margins or beneath the earth or in the past, always threatening to return. This narrative serves deep psychological needs. It establishes the legitimacy of the current order. We defeated the giants, therefore we have the right to rule. It acknowledges the precariousness of civilization. The giants are not gone, only suppressed, and could return if we fail in our vigilance. And it recognizes the reality of change and succession. The world has not always been as it is now. Previous ages existed with different rulers and different rules. And future ages will come when we too will be the displaced giants, the dimly remembered predecessors of whatever comes next. The giants are humanity's memory of itself. Every culture was preceded by others. Every people conquered or displaced someone before them. Every civilization built upon ruins. The giants are those ruins made flesh. They are the past, vast and powerful and dimly understood, always haunting the present. Chapter 11. The Smithsonian Controversy. We have examined the mythology. Now we must examine the claims, because for over a century, a particular narrative has circulated in the United States that giant human skeletons have been found repeatedly throughout North America, particularly in burial mounds, and that these skeletons have been systematically suppressed and destroyed by the Smithsonian Institution to protect the narrative of human evolution and migration. The story goes like this. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, as settlers expanded westward, they frequently encountered Native American burial mounds. Curious about their contents, and often acting as amateur archaeologists or grave robbers, they opened these mounds and found skeletons. Many of these skeletons were reported to be of unusual size, 7 feet tall, 8 feet, even 10 or 12 feet in some accounts. Local newspapers published these findings. Headlines from the era read, "Giant skeleton found in Ohio mound," "8-foot warrior unearthed in Wisconsin," "Ancient giants of Tennessee." These reports appeared in respectable newspapers, not just tabloids. Dozens of such articles exist in newspaper archives. Some of these finds were reportedly sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study and preservation. But then, according to the conspiracy theory, the skeletons disappeared. No giant skeletons are on display at the Smithsonian. When researchers inquire about them, they are told no such specimens exist in the collections. The conclusion drawn by conspiracy theorists: the Smithsonian destroyed the evidence because it contradicted accepted theories about human origins and the peopling of the Americas. Why would the Smithsonian do this? The claimed motivations vary. Some say it was to protect Darwinian evolution, which does not predict giant humans. Some say it was to suppress knowledge of pre-Columbian contact between the Americas and other continents, which giants supposedly provided evidence for. Some say it was to deny Native Americans their true heritage as descendants of a sophisticated giant race. And some say it was part of a broader conspiracy to hide the true history of humanity from the public. This narrative has been amplified in recent decades by alternative history writers, documentaries, and internet forums. It has become an article of faith in certain communities that giant skeletons were real and were suppressed. But is any of it true? Let us examine the claims systematically. First, were giant skeletons actually found? The answer is nuanced. Yes, there are numerous 19th century newspaper reports of unusually large skeletons. However, we must understand the context. Amateur archaeology in that era was unscientific, sensationalistic, and often fraudulent. Newspapers competed for readership and frequently published exaggerated or entirely fabricated stories. The 7-foot skeleton might have been a normal 6-foot skeleton measured inaccurately or reported dishonestly to make the story more exciting. Additionally, burial positioning can create false impressions of size. Skeletons buried in extended positions with artifacts placed near the head, and feet can appear longer than they actually are if measured from artifact to artifact rather than bone to bone. And decomposition can scatter bones, making it difficult for untrained excavators to distinguish one skeleton from multiple individuals buried together. That said, some reports of genuinely tall individuals are likely accurate. Humans can and do reach 7 feet or more. Genetic conditions like gigantism occur rarely but naturally. A 7-foot-tall Native American would have been unusually tall but not impossibly so. Finding such an individual in a burial mound would be noteworthy but not evidence of a giant race. The key claim, however, is that skeletons of 10 or 12 feet were found. For these, there is no credible evidence. No photographs exist of any giant skeleton in situ before excavation. All supposed photographic evidence from the era has been proven to be either misidentified animal bones, hoaxes, or modern digital manipulations. The famous Cardiff giant, discovered in New York in 1869 and promoted as a petrified giant, was quickly proven to be a carved gypsum statue, a deliberate hoax created to make money. Did the Smithsonian receive and destroy giant skeletons? The Smithsonian has repeatedly denied this. They have opened their records to researchers investigating the claim. No documentation exists of giant skeleton receipts, no correspondence about them, no catalogue entries. The Smithsonian did receive many skeletal remains from mound excavations, and these are in their collections. They include individuals of various heights, some tall, but none exceeding normal human parameters. In 2005, the Smithsonian issued a formal statement denying the giant skeleton conspiracy. They pointed out that no credible evidence supported the claims, and that the persistence of the myth was due to a combination of misunderstanding of 19th century journalism, confirmation bias among believers, and deliberate misinformation by hoaxers. But believers were not satisfied. They argued that the Smithsonian's denial was exactly what you would expect if there were a cover-up. Absence of evidence was presented as evidence of suppression. This is a classic unfalsifiable conspiracy theory. Any evidence against the conspiracy is reinterpreted as proof of how well the conspiracy is hidden. In 2014, a satirical website published a fake news article claiming that the US Supreme Court had ruled against the Smithsonian in a case involving destroyed giant skeletons. forcing the institution to release documents admitting to the destruction of thousands of giant specimens. The article was completely fabricated, clearly labeled as satire by the website that created it, but it was shared widely on social media as if it were real news. Millions of people believed it. It is still cited as evidence by giant believers, despite having been thoroughly debunked. This demonstrates an important point. The giant skeleton narrative persists not because of evidence, but because people want it to be true. It appeals to several psychological needs. It suggests that mainstream science is wrong or lying, which is satisfying for those who distrust institutions. It implies that ancient peoples were more impressive than we give them credit for, which resonates with those who reject evolutionary timelines. It creates a mystery and a villain, the Smithsonian, which makes for a compelling narrative. But wanting something to be true does not make it true, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Blurry newspaper clippings from 1880 are not sufficient evidence for a race of 12-foot giants, especially when modern archaeology has thoroughly explored North American burial mounds and found nothing of the sort. That said, we should not dismiss all claims of unusual finds out of hand. Archaeology is a developing field. New discoveries are made constantly. If genuinely anomalous skeletal remains were found, properly documented and independently verified, they would be published and studied, not suppressed. The scientific community is incentivized to publish novel findings, not hide them. A confirmed 10-foot skeleton would make a career, not end one. The Smithsonian controversy reveals more about human psychology than about giants. It shows how legends grow, how misinformation spreads, and how conspiracy theories satisfy emotional needs that facts cannot. The giants, whether they existed or not, have become symbols. And symbols are more powerful than truths, because they mean what we need them to mean. Chapter 12. Photographic evidence. If giant skeletons were real, surely we would have photographs. And indeed, the internet is filled with images purporting to show giant skeletons being excavated by archaeologists. These images are dramatic, widely shared, and completely fraudulent. Let us examine how photographic evidence of giants has been fabricated and why people believe it. The most famous giant skeleton photographs originated from a contest. In 2002, a website called Worth 1000 held a digital art competition called Archaeological Anomalies. Contestants were challenged to create convincing images of impossible archaeological discoveries using Photoshop. Participants submitted incredibly skillful manipulations. Dinosaurs with saddles, alien artifacts, and most famously, giant human skeletons being excavated. One submission showed a giant skeleton in a pit, with normal-sized archaeologists working around it. The image was expertly crafted, with proper lighting, shadows, and realistic dirt textures. It was labeled as a contest entry, clearly identified as fictional digital art. But once the image left the contest website and began circulating online, the context was stripped away. People shared it as real. It appeared on forums, blogs, and eventually on television programs about ancient mysteries. The creators of the images tried to correct the record, posting explanations that these were digital art, not photographs of real discoveries. But the corrections spread far more slowly than the images themselves. Within years, multiple Worth 1000 contest images were being presented as evidence of giant skeletons, despite being proven fabrications. Other giant skeleton photographs are misidentified legitimate finds. In some cases, images of large animal skeletons, particularly whale or elephant bones, are claimed to be giant humans. The untrained eye can mistake these for human remains, especially in low-resolution images. In other cases, normal human skeletons are photographed from misleading angles or with scale objects placed deceptively to make them appear larger than they are. There is also the phenomenon of the traveling giant. One particular image, which shows a large skeleton in the ground, appears with different captions depending on where it is shared. In one version, it was found in India. In another, it was found in Egypt, then Saudi Arabia, then the American Southwest. The skeleton travels the world, its origin story changing with each retelling. This is a clear indication of fraud. If the image were genuine, there would be a single verifiable excavation site, not multiple contradictory locations. Some photographic hoaxes are more sophisticated. Modern AI image generation and photo manipulation tools can create highly realistic fake photographs. These are becoming increasingly difficult to detect without expert analysis. And even when they are exposed as fakes, the debunking rarely reaches everyone who saw the original image. The lie travels halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on, as the saying goes. Why do people create these hoaxes? Motivations vary. Some do it for entertainment, enjoying the art of deception. Some do it for profit, generating traffic to websites that display ads or sell alternative history books. Some do it for ideological reasons, promoting religious or anti-scientific worldviews. And some do it simply to see how many people they can fool, a perverse form of social experiment. And why do people believe them? Partly because they want to. The images confirm pre-existing beliefs about giants, partly because they lack the skills or inclination to investigate. Reverse image searching, checking for original sources, and looking for expert debunkings are not intuitive behaviors for most internet users. And partly because the emotional impact of a dramatic image overrides critical thinking. When you see a photograph of a giant skeleton, the immediate response is shock and wonder, not skepticism. But let us ask the crucial question. If giant skeletons were being found, where are the legitimate photographs? Modern archaeology is obsessively documented. Every excavation is photographed from multiple angles. Every find is catalogued, measured, and preserved. If a 10-foot skeleton were discovered today, we would have high-resolution photographs, detailed measurements, DNA samples, peer-reviewed publications and museum exhibits, not blurry images circulating on conspiracy websites. The absence of such documentation is telling. We have extensive photographic evidence of countless archaeological discoveries, ancient cities, tombs, artifacts, ordinary human remains, but no verifiable photographic evidence of giant humans. This is not because of suppression, it is because they have not been found. There is one category of legitimate giant photographs worth mentioning: individuals with gigantism. Robert Wadlow, who reached 8 feet 11 inches, was extensively photographed during his life in the 1930s and 40s. Photographs show him towering over normal-sized people, creating dramatic visual contrasts. These images are real. But they document a medical condition, not a race of giants. And Wadlow's extreme height came with severe health problems and an early death, demonstrating why humans cannot functionally exist at such scales. Other individuals with gigantism have been photographed throughout history. In the 19th century, circuses and sideshows employed people with unusual physical characteristics, including very tall individuals. Photographs of these performers exist and are legitimate, but they are individuals with rare genetic or hormonal conditions, not evidence of a giant population. Separating real from fake in the digital age is challenging, but certain principles can guide us. First, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A single photograph with no supporting documentation is not sufficient evidence for the existence of giants. Second, provenance matters. Where did the image originate? Who took it? When and where was it taken? If these questions cannot be answered, the image should be treated skeptically. Third, expert verification is essential. Have credentialed archaeologists or anthropologists examined the image and the alleged discovery? If not, skepticism is warranted. the photographic evidence for giants is a mirage. It dissolves upon close examination. But the willingness of millions of people to believe it reveals something important about human nature. We want mysteries. We want the world to be stranger than it appears. We want there to be secrets that science has not yet uncovered. And we are willing to believe images that feed that desire, even when our critical faculties should warn us otherwise. Chapter 13. Megalithic Structures and the Giant Builders. The Pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, Easter Island. Across the world, ancient peoples constructed monumental structures using massive stones, often weighing many tons, moved with apparent ease and assembled with precision that challenges our understanding of ancient technology. And for thousands of years, observers have wondered, how? One persistent answer is giants. If humans cannot move such massive stones with primitive tools, then perhaps giants did it. This explanation appears in mythology across cultures, as we have discussed. But it also appears in more recent pseudoscientific literature, where giants are proposed as a serious historical hypothesis to explain megalithic architecture. Let us examine the logic of the giant builder hypothesis. First, the premise. Ancient peoples lacked the technology to move and place stones, weighing dozens or hundreds of tons. Second, the observation. Such stones were nevertheless moved and placed. Third, the conclusion. Therefore, beings of superhuman strength, giants, must have been responsible. This is an argument from ignorance, because we, allegedly, cannot explain how humans did it. We must invoke non-human agents. It is the same logical structure as the ancient aliens hypothesis, simply substituting giants for extraterrestrials. And it suffers from the same fatal flaw. It underestimates human ingenuity and overestimates the difficulty of the task. Modern experimental archaeology has demonstrated repeatedly that large stones can be moved using simple tools and techniques available to ancient peoples. Levers, rollers, sledges, ramps, and large numbers of workers are sufficient to accomplish seemingly impossible tasks. In the 1990s, a team of archaeologists moved a 50-ton stone block using only wooden levers and rollers, proving that Easter Island's Moai statues could have been transported by the Rapa Nui people without invoking giants or aliens. The construction of the pyramids has been studied extensively. While we do not know every detail of the methods used, we understand the basic principles. Ramps, either straight or spiral, allowed workers to drag blocks up to the construction site. Copper tools, sand abrasives, and patient labor allowed the cutting and shaping of limestone blocks. And a large workforce, not slaves, as was once thought, but paid laborers, provided the necessary human power. Stonehenge's bluestones, which weigh up to 4 tons each and were transported from Wales to southern England, a distance of about 140 miles, could have been moved using sledges, rollers, and waterways. Experiments have shown that 30 people can move a 1-ton stone on wooden rollers across relatively flat ground. Multiply the workforce and apply ancient engineering knowledge, and the construction becomes plausible without giants. Baalbek in Lebanon is often cited as evidence of giant builders because its foundation contains 3 stones, the trilithon, each weighing approximately 800 tons. How could ancient peoples move such massive blocks? The answer is that we do not know for certain, but several plausible methods exist. Ramps with shallow inclines, combined with sledges and enormous workforces, could accomplish the task over months or years. The ancient engineers who designed Baalbek were not primitive. They were masters of their craft, working within the technological constraints of their time, but pushing those constraints to their limits. And we must remember, attributing these structures to giants does not actually solve the problem. If giants built them, How did the giants move the stones? Were the giants themselves so strong that they could lift 800-ton blocks with their hands? If so, they violate the laws of physics. Muscle strength scales with cross-sectional area, but body mass scales with volume. A giant twice as tall as a human is not twice as strong, but more than twice as heavy. The square cube law, which we will discuss in more detail, makes giants of the required scale physically impossible. So the giant builder hypothesis replaces one mystery, how did ancient humans move massive stones, with an even greater mystery, where did giants come from? How did they evolve? Why did they go extinct? And why do we have no skeletal evidence of them? This is not explanatory progress. This is trading a soluble problem for an insoluble one. Moreover, the giant builder hypothesis is deeply disrespectful to the actual builders. When we attribute Stonehenge or the pyramids to giants or aliens, we are implicitly saying that ancient humans were incapable of great achievements. We are denying them credit for their ingenuity, skill, and labor. This is a form of historical erasure. The workers who built these structures were real people, with names and families and lives. They deserve to be remembered as the architects and engineers they were, not forgotten because we prefer to imagine giants. That said, the structures themselves clearly inspired giant legends. Later peoples, encountering ruins whose construction methods they did not understand, naturally wondered how they were built. If normal humans could not build them, or so it seemed, then perhaps giants did. This is a rational inference given the available information. It is only wrong because the premise is wrong. Normal humans could and did build them. There is also a psychological dimension. Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We look for connections and explanations. When we encounter something impressive, we want to know who made it. If the answer is not immediately obvious, we fill the gap with the most satisfying available story. Giants are satisfying. They are simple, dramatic, and they elevate the structure's importance. A building built by giants is more impressive than a building built by normal humans. So attributing it to giants is flattering to the structure itself. But flattery is not truth. And the truth is that humans, working with simple tools but sophisticated knowledge, built every ancient megalithic structure we have found. No giants required. The real marvel is not that giants existed, but that humans, with flesh and blood limitations, accomplished such extraordinary feats. The megaliths stand as monuments not to giant builders, but to human ambition, ingenuity, and cooperation. They are evidence of what we can achieve when we work together toward a common goal, when we plan carefully, when we apply knowledge accumulated over generations, and when we commit to projects that will outlast our own lifetimes. That is the true legacy of the megalith builders, and it is far more inspiring than giants. Chapter 14: Medical Gigantism. We have explored mythology, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscience. Now we must turn to actual science. Because humans can be giants in a sense, medical conditions exist that cause extreme height. Understanding these conditions illuminates what is biologically possible and what is not. Gigantism is caused by excess growth hormone, typically due to a pituitary gland tumor. If this occurs during childhood, before the growth plates in the bones close, it causes accelerated and prolonged growth. Individuals with gigantism can reach heights of 7 feet or more. The tallest confirmed human in history, Robert Wadlow, reached 8 feet 11 inches due to gigantism. He continued growing his entire life because his tumor was never successfully treated. But Robert Wadlow's life was not easy. His extreme height came with severe medical complications. He required leg braces to walk. His limbs had poor circulation, making injuries slow to heal. At age 22, a leg brace rubbed a blister on his ankle. The blister became infected. Despite medical treatment, the infection spread, and Wadlow died of sepsis. His height, while extraordinary, was also debilitating and ultimately lethal. This is the reality of extreme height. The human body is not designed to function at such scales. The cardiovascular system struggles to pump blood against gravity over long distances. The heart must work harder, leading to hypertension and heart failure. Joints bear extraordinary stress, causing arthritis and chronic pain. The bones themselves, while longer, are not proportionally stronger, making fractures more likely. And as we will discuss, the square-cube law imposes fundamental limits on size. Acromegaly is a related condition that occurs when excess growth hormone is produced in adulthood, after the growth plates have closed. Instead of increasing height, it causes the bones of the face, hands, and feet to enlarge. Affected individuals develop prominent brow ridges, enlarged jaws, and enlarged extremities. Acromegaly can also affect internal organs, causing them to enlarge, which leads to additional health problems. Some researchers believe that Goliath, the biblical giant, had acromegaly. His great size and the specific phrasing in some biblical texts suggesting problems with his vision are consistent with a pituitary tumor, causing both growth and visual field defects. If this is true, then David's victory becomes less miraculous and more strategic. He exploited Goliath's poor vision by attacking from a distance with a projectile weapon. There are other genetic conditions that cause unusual height. Marfan syndrome causes elongated limbs and fingers, giving affected individuals a tall, slender appearance. Soto's syndrome causes overgrowth and distinctive facial features. Klinefelter syndrome, where males have an extra X chromosome, often results in above-average height. And simple genetic inheritance can produce tall individuals when both parents are tall and multiple height-related genes are favorably aligned. But there is a difference between being very tall and being a giant. A 7-foot person is very tall, but still within the normal range of human variation. An 8-foot person is at the extreme edge of that range, and such individuals almost always have medical conditions. A 10-foot person is beyond what human biology can sustain, and a 12-foot person, as some giant legends describe, is biologically impossible given the current understanding of human physiology. Why? The square-cube law. When you double an object's height, you quadruple its surface area, but octuple its volume and weight. Bones and muscles scale with cross-sectional area, which is related to the square of linear dimensions. But weight scales with volume, which is the cube of linear dimensions. So as a creature gets larger, its weight increases faster than the strength of its bones and muscles. This is why ants can lift many times their own body weight, but elephants cannot. Ants are small, so their muscle strength, related to cross-sectional area, is more than sufficient to support their light bodies. Elephants are huge, so their bones are proportionally much thicker, and their movements more constrained to avoid breaking their own legs. Humans are near the upper limit of primate body size. A 12-foot human would weigh perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 pounds. The bones would need to be enormously thick just to support that weight, making the person even heavier. The joints would be under constant catastrophic stress. The heart would need to be proportionally larger and more powerful, but the blood vessels would face pressure that could cause aneurysms or strokes. And the metabolic demands would be immense. Such a person would need to consume enormous amounts of food just to sustain basic functions. Could evolution produce a giant species? Potentially, but it would require significant anatomical changes. The bones would need to be structurally different, perhaps with internal reinforcement or different material properties. The cardiovascular system would need redesign. The metabolic efficiency would need improvement. Essentially, you would not have a large human. You would have a different species entirely, one adapted for size. And we see no evidence that such a species evolved. The fossil record of human evolution is extensive. We have remains from multiple hominin species over millions of years. None were giants. Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens all fall within a similar size range. There were no 10-foot hominins. Gigantopithecus, an extinct genus of ape, did reach impressive sizes. Estimates based on jaw and tooth fossils suggest Gigantopithecus blacki stood about 10 feet tall and weighed up to 1,200 pounds. But this was an ape, not a human. It was quadrupedal or knuckle walking, not fully bipedal, and it went extinct approximately 100,000 years ago, long before modern humans appeared. Could Gigantopithecus fossils have inspired giant legends? Possibly. If ancient peoples found its bones, they might have interpreted them as belonging to giant humans. But this is speculation. We have no evidence of such finds being recorded in a way that connects them to giant myths. The scientific reality is clear. Extreme height in humans is rare, medically problematic, and constrained by biological limits. Giants as described in mythology, 12, 15, 20 feet tall, proportionally strong, long-lived and healthy, cannot exist within the laws of biology and physics as we understand them. This does not mean the myths are meaningless, but it does mean they are not literal history. The giants of legend are not biological entities. They are something else, cultural constructs, symbolic representations, or misinterpretations of other phenomena. And understanding what they actually represent requires looking beyond biology to psychology and anthropology. Chapter 15: Psychological and Anthropological Explanations. If giants never existed, why does every culture have giant legends? This is not a trivial question. The universality of the giant motif demands explanation. And fortunately, psychology and anthropology provide several compelling answers that do not require the literal existence of giants. First, childhood perspective. To a small child, adults are giants. A 5-year-old child looking up at a 6-foot adult experiences the same proportional size difference as a 6-foot adult looking up at a 12-foot giant. The child's world is populated by beings enormously larger and stronger than itself. These beings have power the child does not understand and cannot resist. They provide food, protection, and judgment. They are, in every meaningful sense, giants. As we grow, we internalize these early experiences. The memory of being small in a world of giants becomes part of our psychological structure. And when we create myths, we populate them with beings that recapitulate that childhood experience. Giants in mythology are, in part, projections of how our parents seemed to us when we were young. Second, fossil misidentification. Ancient peoples regularly encountered large bones. Dinosaur fossils, mammoth bones, whale skeletons, and the remains of other extinct megafauna are found worldwide. Without modern paleontological knowledge, these bones would be interpreted in the most obvious way, as belonging to large versions of familiar animals. Large leg bones might be assumed to belong to giant humans. Skulls with prominent features might be interpreted as giant or monstrous humanoids. The dwarf elephant skull and cyclops connection we mentioned earlier is a specific example of this general principle. Ancient peoples were intelligent and observant, but they lacked the scientific framework to correctly identify fossils. Their interpretations were logical given their available information. They just happened to be wrong. Third, explaining impressive ruins. When people encounter architectural remains from earlier civilizations, especially when those remains are more sophisticated than current technology can easily replicate, they need an explanation. If we cannot build it, then whoever built it must have been special, more advanced, more powerful, larger. Giants provide that explanation. This is not stupidity, it is a rational inference. The problem is that it underestimates the ingenuity of previous peoples. The builders were not giants. They were normal humans with specialized knowledge and collective organization. But without understanding their methods, attributing the work to giants seems reasonable. Fourth, cultural memory of population displacement. When one group conquers another, the memory of the displaced people is preserved, but it is often distorted. The previous inhabitants become larger, more powerful, more dangerous in the retelling. This serves several functions. It makes the conquest more impressive, it justifies the violence, and it explains why the previous people are no longer present. Native American giant legends, for example, might preserve memories of earlier populations with different physical characteristics or cultural practices. Celtic giant legends might remember pre-Celtic inhabitants of Britain and Ireland. Greek giant myths might encode memories of pre-Greek Anatolian or Minoan peoples. The giants are not literally large. They are metaphorically large, important, powerful, and displaced. Fifth, the amplification effect of oral tradition. Stories grow in the telling. A warrior who was 6.5 feet tall becomes 7 feet in memory. A generation later, he is 8 feet. After centuries of oral transmission, he is 10 feet. This is not deliberate deception. This is the natural drift of narrative. Impressive becomes more impressive. Dangerous becomes more dangerous. The memorable becomes even more memorable. Sixth, symbolic representation of natural forces. Giants often embody aspects of nature: storms, mountains, earthquakes, the sea. Making these forces anthropomorphic allows humans to relate to them, to negotiate with them symbolically, to feel a sense of control through ritual or narrative. The giant is not a being, but a metaphor. Defeating the giant is not literal, but represents human mastery over nature through technology, knowledge, or courage. Seventh, the other made monstrous. Enemies, foreigners, and outsiders are often described as physically different and usually larger or more dangerous than they actually are. This is psychological self-protection. If our enemies are giants, then our fear is justified, and our victory, if achieved, is more glorious. The enemy is not described as they are, but as they feel: overwhelming, threatening, monstrous. Eighth, rare instances of actual tall individuals. Every population includes some people who are significantly taller than average. In pre-modern times, when nutrition was poor for most people, a well-fed warrior or nobleman might be 6 or 7 inches taller than the average peasant. This height difference, combined with the psychological tendency to exaggerate, could easily produce giant reputations. And if such an individual had gigantism, reaching 7 or 8 feet, their memory would be further amplified in legend. All of these factors, operating together, can fully account for the global giant tradition without requiring literal giants to have existed. This is not reductionist or dismissive. It is an explanation that takes seriously both the myths and the reality. The myths are meaningful, psychologically important, and culturally valuable. But they are not historical records in the modern sense. They are narratives that encode experiences, fears, memories, and explanations in symbolic form. Does this mean giants are just myths? That depends on what we mean by just. Myths are not trivial. They are how humans make sense of the world. They are collective wisdom, cultural identity, and psychological necessity. Giants matter not because they walk the earth, but because they walk through our imagination, serving as symbols of everything that is larger than us: nature, death, time, the past, the enemy, the other. And sometimes, symbols are more real than facts, because symbols shape how we see the world, and how we see the world determines how we act in it. We have traveled through millennia and across continents, We have examined the Nephilim of Genesis, the Titans of Greece, the Jotnar of Norse mythology. We have explored giant legends from Native American tribes, from Celtic Ireland, from Hindu epics, from Japanese folklore. We have investigated the Smithsonian controversy, the fake photographs, the megalithic structures. We have examined the medical reality of gigantism and the psychological reasons why humans tell giant stories. And now we must ask the final question. What have we learned? First, giants are universal. Every culture tells stories about beings larger than humans. This cannot be coincidence. It reflects something fundamental about the human condition. Our awareness of being small in a vast universe, our encounters with forces beyond our control, our memories of childhood, our need to explain the impressive and the terrifying. Second, giants are always defeated. In biblical tradition, the Nephilim drown in the flood. In Greek mythology, the Titans are imprisoned in Tartarus, and the Gigantes are killed. In Norse mythology, even though the giants ultimately win at Ragnarok, the gods fight them heroically to the end. Giant legends are narratives of struggle between order and chaos, between civilization and wilderness, between the current age and the previous one. And they always affirm that the current order, whatever its flaws, is necessary and just. Third, giants serve multiple functions. They explain ruins and fossils. They embody natural forces. They represent displaced populations. They justify conquest and violence. They teach moral lessons. They provide satisfying narratives of heroism and divine intervention. Giants are not one thing. They are whatever a culture needs them to be. Fourth, the literal giant hypothesis fails on every level. There is no credible physical evidence. The biological constraints are insurmountable. The conspiracy theories are unfounded. And the alternative explanations, psychological, anthropological, and cultural, fully account for the myths without requiring actual giants. But fifth, and most importantly, giants are true in the way myths are true. They are not historical documents, but they are historical truths. They tell us what ancient peoples feared, what they valued, what they remembered, and what they needed to believe. And in doing so, they tell us about ourselves. Because we are the inheritors of these stories, they have shaped Western civilization and cultures worldwide for thousands of years. And they continue to shape how we think about power, size, the past, and the other. The real giants, perhaps, are the structures of power that dominate our lives. Corporations that wield more influence than nations. Governments that claim the right to life and death over millions. Economic systems that seem too vast to change. Environmental crises that threaten the entire planet. These are the giants we face. Not 10-foot warriors with bronze armor, but systems and forces that exceed any individual's capacity to control or even fully comprehend. And the lesson of giant mythology is relevant here. Every giant tradition teaches that giants can be defeated. Not easily, not without cost, but they can be beaten. David defeats Goliath. Heracles helps the gods defeat the Gigantes. Thor fights the giants throughout his life. And at Ragnarok, even though the gods fall, they fight to the last breath. This is the true value of giant stories. They teach that overwhelming power is not invincible, that the small can triumph over the large through courage, intelligence, and divine favor, or in secular terms, through strategy, cooperation, and justice. That every giant has a weakness, and that even if defeat is inevitable, resistance is meaningful. We tell giant stories because we need them. We need to believe that the forces larger than us are not omnipotent. We need to remember that previous orders were overthrown. We need to imagine that current powers can be challenged, and we need heroes who are willing to face the giants, even when victory is unlikely. Whether giants walk the earth in ages past is ultimately less important than the fact that they walk through our minds in the present. They are part of how we understand the world. They are part of our cultural inheritance. And they will continue to be part of human mythology for as long as humans tell stories. Because the world is always full of giants, and heroes are always needed to face them. The Nephilim were the first, but they were not the last. The giants have never truly disappeared. They have only changed forms, from literal beings of flesh and bone to symbolic representations of power, nature, and chaos. From the monsters of ancient myth to the systems and forces of the modern world. And the war between gods and giants, between order and chaos, between the current age and the previous one continues. Not on battlefields of bronze and iron, but in the struggle to maintain civilization, to preserve knowledge, to resist tyranny, and to protect the vulnerable from those who would dominate them. The giants are still here. They have always been here, and they always will be. The only question is whether we will have the courage to face them. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and this has been the complete history of giants, from the Nephilim to the Titans, from the Jotnar to the Sitakar, from ancient texts to modern hoaxes, from biological impossibility to psychological necessity. 2.5 hours, every culture, every tradition, every theory, every truth. You may believe in giants or not, but you cannot deny that they have shaped human culture for millennia, and they continue to shape it today. The stories we tell about giants are the stories we tell about power, about the past, about the enemy, and ultimately about ourselves. Sleep well, and if you dream of giants, remember, they are larger than you, stronger than you, older than you, but they are not invincible. And every giant in the end can fall. The question is whether you will be the one to face them,